Greetings, healthcare colleague. My name is Kevin Kawchek. I'm the CEO founder of Chemical Q Device. This is discussion 83 for May 18th, 2023, about quantum advantage for medical. I wanted to set the stage here as far as a lot of this. It's the devil's in the details as far as programming goes to try to get quantum advantage. So I'll start a little bit with classical. So classical, you have standard hyperparameters, batch, which so does quantum, learning rate, so does quantum, momentum, that's kind of specific, but I think it has an analogy in quantum. Now, the things that makes quantum machine learning, or basically machine learning with VQC algorithms, unique is the quantum circuit. So in specific, that has a number of qubits. So say, for instance, anywhere from, you can go down to one, but you'll typically see four. And then these days, you won't see too much above 16, and anything above that might be like a proof of concept. And then each quantum circuit has a certain depth. So the depth is referred to as the number of gates that it has. So figure like it's like deep learning, but it's not quite that same kind of convolutional field that we have in imaging. It's more like at this specific point, all of the qubits are doing this, move over to another time frame, and they're doing this. So you still have step size, batch size, all these types of things. And there's other parameters such as reduction. So it's learning rate reduction after a certain number of qubits. So if you want to change it after, or a certain number of epochs. So if you want to change it after 10 epochs and so on and so forth. And I haven't had too much luck with the QM delta and the models that I've trained. So I've done a couple penny lane, could have done a couple Qiskit as well. Now, the quantum circuit in specific is unique because it has an embedding layer, a variational layer, and a measurement layer. Now, the embedding layer can be basis encoding, angle encoding most commonly. You can also have amplitude encoding, and you also have a thing called IQP encoding, which a lot of people are looking forward to as the hardware emerges and simulators emerge too. So in my experience, the embedding layer is by far plays the biggest part as far as getting results for quantum. You might have a layer of Hadamard gates, and then this specific embedding layer, the angle or basis or even amplitude or IQP. But it's so important because it's turning this classical information into quantum information. And then the variational layer, which contains your C0 gates, Toffoli gates, Fredkin gates, and other gates, I haven't found it's doing nearly as much as just embedding it into quantum and then measuring it. So, but that's an option there too. And then at the end of that, you measure the quantum, each of the qubits, and it's just a simple 1 or 0, or sometimes 1 or -1. And, that's translated back into classical information. So what this means for medical is basically this. Like if you want to run real experiments on quantum simulators and real quantum hardware, is that you have to be aware of what you're doing, right? Because there's a paper out, it's by Alexei Melnikov et al. And this is in November 2022. And basically, this is Terra Quantum. And what they found is that anything below 30 qubits, you should run a quantum simulator. Because even though on paper the quantum computers are faster, they have initialization, they have compiling. So that's the threshold that they set. So again, this is back in November 2022. And then, here we have new hardware announcements hitting Amazon Briquette, so we can go over those a little bit later. And that's on the CPU side. Now, on the GPU side, NVIDIA has a thing called Tensor Network GPU quantum simulators, and they say it can go up to hundreds of qubits, basically with this, hundreds of thousands. It's just, this is the thing to look at. Keep in mind that GPUs put out some heat, and it'll take a while to do these types of things. Now, what was interesting in the study by Terra Quantum was basically, so Terra Quantum has their own simulator called QMware. This goes up to 40 qubits. And they found that their 40 qubit quantum simulator was a lot slower than Righetti's real quantum computer at 40 qubits. So again, this is over that 30 qubit threshold from, switching from quantum simulators, which by the way, don't have error. And then the other thing with QPUs or real quantum computers is they have error. But that's basically a good catch up. If you're at 40 qubits, in this case, it was 0.02% of the time it took the real quantum computer as opposed to the quantum simulator. So it's definitely interesting things. And they got into threads, so you're optimizing threads. So this is their figure 4, and I'll put it in the chat there. So if you're at one thread, that's basically 4 to 12 qubits is typically where I've been at. And you could use 10 threads for it to be advantageous at 14 to 16. They go all the way up to 40. And so looking forward with all this in healthcare is, there's a couple different options. So you can have a CPU in a QPU or a simulated QPU. When I say QPU, it means real hardware or simulated. You could have a GPU QPU, which is less likely because you always need that classical controller. But the more likely is the CPU, GPU, QPU, because you need the controller for CPU, you need the speed of the GPU, and then you need additional benefits of that QPU, real or simulated. And that's the easy part. Because after that, you really have to get into the specific applications. So your data set. I don't know. I've still been talking around to find out as far as policies with simulators versus real hardware and fine tuning. But it's important to get good results, to begin with, and then as that starts to carry out into everybody's specific applications. So I'd be a little bit interested to hear from people, healthcare or quantum-based or hybrid computing. And keep in mind that we're talking hybrid computing. It's not pure quantum and all these things. So yeah, feel free to, you can come on or unmute as well. And yeah, like I said, so the IonQ news this week's 25 algorithmic qubits is on AWS Braket. So that'd be interesting to see as far as like startup time is, according to Terra Quantum, there's a threshold. When should you switch from a quantum simulator that's noise free? And it seems like I've heard Quantinuum say get up above maybe 50 or 60 qubits up to 100. And then that's kind of like the sweet spot for a real quantum computer, where it makes sense because you still have some noise, but you're taking advantage of a speed advantage that we can't get close with a quantum simulator today. So yeah, that's basically what I found. I've been running a ton. So I'm focusing on image analysis. So this is basically, you have quantum transfer learning, and it's for the classification at the end. And then it's still the convolutional part, and pooling is still done all classically. And it's that final layer at the end, see what it does. And there's other papers. I've done another penny line model that's convolutional with quantum. And then I did another IBM model, and that was convolutional. And every quantum gate was making up the layers of the convolutional and pooling layers, but it was very restricted to like 8 pixels or 8 qubits. So it didn't, if you want to do the really awesome stuff in quantum, it's typically like you're limited in number of data, number of pixels is the number of qubits. And a 28 by 28 image might be like over 700 qubits, right? So we're not quite there yet for that model. So it's a mixture of stuff, right? You want benefit and then something that will run well. I think, for simulator, something to go through the door in healthcare, if it's running on a CPU or GPU, although it's quantum mechanics, it'll go through the door probably a lot faster than like a real hardware with some noise. And then as far as running goes, has anybody else gotten a chance to get up on Colab or local Jupyter Lab notebook or into Qiskit as far as, getting started on your own, either the tutorials, demos, or your own kind of thing? Go ahead, Ron.
I just finished day 2 of the Quantum Challenge Summer Camp 2023. It's not terribly easy.
Yeah.
But I'm fortunate to have had a lot of experience with Python and experience with tracking down issues and stuff. So I was able to get through it without having to bounce out and ask anybody for any help. But day 1 they make fairly easy. They give you the circuit diagrams. So they basically say this is what it's got to look like when you're done.
Oh, okay.
But on day 2 there was no circuit diagrams.
Okay.
So
You weren't
And then there,
losing sleep
yeah,
over that, were you?
no, I mean, I still got the thing done in less than an hour, but, still waiting for the job to run because, it's a bit of a joke. I know they have a lot of people that have signed up for this, but we're supposed to be allocated our own set of machines. And, so we'll have to see how long it takes to get a job to run. And then I think they said something about during the either the it's 5 days, 5 labs. Towards the end, they claim they're going to give access to the Eagle. So
Oh,
right now we're not talking to the Eagle. We're talking to I forget what it's named. It's a 27-bit machine,
yeah.
27
Is it
27
Falcon?
qubit machine. You know,
Yeah, it's one of those.
I it's called uh, well, it's called this. The back end name is IBM Peak Skill. So I don't know. That doesn't really give us any indication as to what hardware's there.
Yeah, that's cool though.
Yeah,
And then did they give you kind of any intuition as far as what type of circuits might work well on the 127?
haven't got there yet. So waiting to find out. So far, these circuits, the first two labs have been 1, 2, and 3 qubit circuits. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have you used the, what do they call that? Phase? Like it's a phase guide, like you put it over a vertical line of gates, phase disk, and then you put it over the next, and it tells you exactly what phase each qubit is in at that specific gate.
Well, we're doing it in the Jupyter lab, in the IBM workspace. They're not doing it in the circuit lab.
Uh-huh.
So you don't have access to, so I'm assuming there's some way that once I get my code done, I could drag it over and drop it into or somehow upload it into the IBM quantum circuit lab, and then use those graphical tools, so you can step through and see the state at every spot in the timeline. Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool.
but
So for those that don't know, so basically when you're implementing a quantum circuit, it's to serve some type of purpose. So for classification, you could have a quantum circuit up towards, convolution where it's sliding across the image, or you could have it at the end, like the final classification step. And again, these are like early models because it's based off, a PyTorch model that was from Stanford, and this Penny Lane QML was basically 2019 updated in 2021. And I think the biggest thing is just the hardware running bigger circuits, giving it bigger tasks, that it can do. And it'd be cool to start to see these intermediate ones because you see a lot with like 4 qubits, and I might change the circuit from there, like make it more robust. And a lot of this is somewhat automated, that it automates, basically changes your for loop for you. It's correctly done. So you don't have to change like number of qubits, number of qubits, number of qubits. It's all like a preset thing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I've been pinning it up against this other classical model, this other transfer learning model, and it's been doing well. So I'll do my best optimizing the transfer, do my best optimizing the QTL, and then pin them up as far as like accuracy loss, either training or validation. And, so it's very productive, and they definitely behave differently. So it takes a long time, I believe, to actually claim that you have quantum advantage for your application. And I think a lot of people assume that term means significant quantum advantage. And then, it's for multi applications, but there are advantages that you can have implementing circuits and, improving standard classification performance. So, if you check the news, I don't really watch mainstream news a lot. I look for the technical articles, and if there's something I find that's like this, I'll refer back to the original article. So I'll put that Terra Quantum in because that's very interesting. The whole study. So four of the so basically it's an ion trap, INQ, and it's a bunch of like an IBM, an OQC, and a Rigetti. And the Rigetti was the only one that went up to 40 qubits that was available, or that they tested at that time. This is November 2022. And then they said that it made sense to use a real quantum computer. But I always thought it was much lower as far as like you want to switch over to a real quantum computer for speed, but they said that there's other factors, initialization and compiling there too. So I put that in the chat. It was actually sent to me by one of the authors, and it'll save you a lot of time and a lot of money. I've only given Google Colab like 50, $60, and I've had like an MVP in 5 iterations. But if you start running on real quantum hardware, in any of these things that's like significant qubits, and you don't even know that you have noise that's affecting your results, and then you just keep running until you're optimizing hyperparameters without even using a simulator. And that's the key. Always start with a simulator, especially at lower qubits. And a lot of people want to run a real quantum hardware because number one, you say you just did. And I would do the same thing too. I just ran on a real quantum computer, but after I learned about NVIDIA's this tensor network GPU quantum simulator, hundreds or thousands of qubits, it's not limited, I don't believe, in RAM in the same way as a traditional CPU quantum simulator. So that's definitely worth checking out too. And
Yeah, I would have to see the specs on that NVIDIA claim.
yeah, it was from QHack, so that was February, and I haven't done a super detail because I know I'm not ready to make that jump yet. But say, for instance, if you want to switch from a lightning.qubit to lightning.gpu, you have to install some other things in your notebook, CUDA related, like standard CUDA related to get, and I haven't got that to work, but in theory that should be faster, and I think it's free. So if you look at Penny Lane's quantum simulators, it's the last one, and it's in partnership with NVIDIA too. So there's some cool stuff that's out there, but typically the higher performance stuff either takes more effort, like getting this lightning.gpu to work, or just cost. To say, if you just said to Amazon, do the best you can, this is the results we needed, it's going to get expensive, right? So
Yeah, but what sort of trick are they? I mean, I assume they're talking about NVIDIA providing a simulator for that size operation,
yeah,
or,
so for
or are they
Amazon they have
to do something
SV1.
else?
Yeah, they have a couple kind of like top tier. They say they're concurrent. You can do like 30 plus concurrent, and I think that's the same as like your original, how does that, threads. I think it's somewhat like a thread if it's not exactly that. But yeah, Amazon, I know those are top tier quantum simulators, SV1, and they have, at least they have a TN1, TensorFlow, SV1, and then a DM1, density matrix. And those three are kind of their top tier. The tensor network can go up to 50 qubits, and the other two, I think, are around 32. So, I think that's what it is. It's 32 concurrent operations or 32 threads. I shared a little bit earlier, but basically, if you're real low, like 4 to 12, you only need a single thread anyway. And then by the time you get up to 50, it would make sense to utilize these, additional things that the AWS simulators have.
Yeah, but once again, the formula for specking out memory for a simulator is 2 to the n plus 4
Uh-huh.
bytes of memory. So for 32 bits, a 32 qubit machine, that's 2 to the 36, which is like 64 gigabytes of memory.
Yeah, probably at least.
Well, no, that's the number.
Yeah,
That's if you want to run reasonable floating point resolution, you could get away with a little bit less, but um, and there may be tricks where they employ some tricks to somehow more efficiently store sparse matrices and stuff like that. But when your quantum machine gets bigger, your registers get bigger. I don't see any instance where the matrices are getting less dense. Um, if anything, they're actually getting more busy. So
yeah.
you'll probably wind up needing that size memory. So I think the thing with NVIDIA though is, well, if you got 64 gigabytes of memory, you've got a matrix at 64 gigabytes in size. Yeah, you're probably going to have to stick a couple of GPUs on it to do any actual processing in a normal amount of time.
Yeah,
So
so the gentleman that was on, so again, for those that don't know, I think it's Xanadu, which is Penny Lane. That's the hardware company of the software, Penny Lane. They have this thing called QHack. So it's QHACK. And I got stuck, watching several of these videos. And the one that I keep referring to, it was an NVIDIA and some other company related to AI. And they were trying to do that stuff as far as put GPUs really close to QPUs, to get benefits of both. But with the GPUs, they tend to run a little hot. And then, that's the question, like, can you run a wire to that's like millimeters away or those types of things? But yeah, it's interesting because NVIDIA is working on at least three big things. The one I keep talking about is this tensor, network GPU quantum simulator with, hundreds or thousands of qubits and, potentially. And then the other thing is it's called cuQuantum. It's like CUDA, which is their GPU, platform, but with quantum. So it's GPUs, quantum simulators. And then the other thing is called DGX. So then they take a GPU, NVIDIA GPU, and then correct the error coming off of a real quantum computer. And that's the most recent headlines that I've seen is the DGX. And the next question, when we're talking about medical, getting this out the door, I've seen algorithms that, for FDA or some other, I think it's, yeah, FDA approval. If your GPU goes out, can you run your algorithm on a CPU, right? And how many days would that take? So that's CPU, GPU. So if you bump up to QPU, then that's like, and the QPA is not simulated, it's its own thing too. That's a third leg to the puzzle. But if you're talking about QPU simulator, then that runs on a CPU or GPU, then even if it's quantum mechanics, I just see that going through a lot faster. And
yeah,
hence,
so
the goal is for really higher qubit simulators, and they're going to be noise free, but just to break through this whole like 40 or 60 qubits for simulators.
yeah, so I just did a quick Google, and it looks like the NVIDIA RTX 3080, as far as the GPU card, is like the most recent. Um, they're claiming that the card comes with 12 gigabytes on board. Uh, I could almost bet that there are bigger memory cards. It's not telling me
Yeah,
which NVIDIA chip, but so if you, let's say it was 16 gigabytes on board, you can put 4 cards in a machine if you have a big enough motherboard. And so now you've got that 64 gig of high performance computing backing it. So you're not using the core memory on your motherboard. You're pushing the job out onto say 4 GPU cards, and I should do a pretty good, 4 GPUs, especially with the latest and greatest NVIDIA chips, should handle that quite nicely, I would guess, any
yeah.
number of
I
large
know that.
matrix operations.
So this is a different class, but it's called V100 or A100s, and they're like data center GPUs. And I know the V100 at least has 16 gigs, and then it can go up to 32. And I think the A100 is at least 32 gigs, and that's like an $8,000 GPU card,
Well, you're specing the actual NVIDIA chips. Uh, um, that doesn't mean that they're deployed that way. And I think actually the latest chip, and I'm not sure whether they've actually released it. I have to go look. It's the H series. It's the
Uh,
H100,
yeah, yeah,
and
those just came
but
out.
that's just the chip. That's just the chip. Someone's got to put that on the board. They got to populate it with fast RAM, and you know, if they're, I have no problem believing that some of those previous chips can handle 32 gigabyte, but it's a matter of how much memory can you get on a board that will go into a PC or some other like a 19-inch rack with some other. Not sure what's out there, but you probably, I know that there are motherboards that have many PCI slots. So if you can get a lot of cards in there, you can build a pretty hefty little computation engine. And
Yeah,
then it's just
those.
a matter of spreading it out. You know, if you get that size job, you spread it out to 4 boards. Each board can be working in parallel. It should have no problem doing that. Should be able to build a 32-bit simulator that performs reasonably well as long as you got, I don't know, these boards are in the sub $2,000 range. So for, 10, 12, 15K, you could build a machine, I bet.
Yeah, and the cloud is just an awesome thing because once you start doing all this machine learning and even quantum machine learning, so in QML, it'll actually say, for instance, like a penny lane default qubit, that part will run on their quantum simulator, and then the bulk of it is still running on, NVIDIA's graphic chart cards that I've been mentioning. Does anybody else have anything? Because I know a lot of this touches into the medical aspect of it. And there's still, anytime you introduce anything new, and again, like something like a simulator compared to a real, quantum chip or real QPU might be even a bigger jump to make. But as far as like getting it in there, like, data sets, privacy, fine tuning, these types of things too, again, I don't see too much additional needed to turn a CPU into a quantum simulator. I could be wrong. I know it takes a significant amount of RAM, and that can be run in the cloud too. But I guess on that medical end, does anybody kind of have anything as far as like what is lacking with CPU algorithms, in specific deep learning algorithms? So like take for instance the first deep learning algorithm for FDA was 2017, a company called Arteris, and then that just started a whole thing, and that has its own issue because when you run these, you don't always get the same output hospital to hospital or patient to patient in the same hospital, but you're typically getting a lot better results due to that, deep neural networks. So anybody, so Anand or Antonio or our other guests here? So, and you can watch a lot of I was watching some Stanford videos today, and that's what they talked about is a lot of this that goes into development and it just takes time to deploy. So it's the fear of this one thing going wrong and only relying on AI. So, as safeguards come in and it's more robust, I think you'll see more and more in healthcare. But that was what, 2017. In 2017 was like for medical, it was huge for deep learning. It's just like either technology or the hardware was good enough, and then they were starting to either get approvals or basically other things that you would need for it to be used with patients. And there's been analogies, or actually I draw analogies. So deep learning didn't get its hardware that it needed until the late 1990s to especially like early 2000s. And then after that, that was 17 years to get FDA approval for deep learning. So now they have a whole framework for it as far as if you update the algorithm, it's called an ACP, and all these other tasks that you need to do and to keep on top of it due to it's inherently going to run differently every time or most times. And then anything else any other questions, regarding, so quantum advantage for medical, it sounds like, it's a hard thing to do. And it's going to follow the footsteps of cybersecurity, I believe, because there's a law that requires PQC or parameterized quantum circuits to be implemented by every federal agency. I think that's by this summer, or at least, significant headway towards it. And the technology that we're seeing in quantum machine learning, quantum isn't doing all of the machine learning. It has a parameterized quantum circuit that typically sits after all of this, say, for instance, like a ResNet or a convolutional neural net, and then it does something else with it quantum, and then that's, gets measured, something else, final classification, and then the next epoch comes in. But it's in the loop, but it's not, it on its own is not machine learning images right now. It's like a supplement to it in most cases. And, as far as other breakthroughs, in AI and medical, is that, I mean, it's like, it's one of those things, like the eyes are bigger than the stomach with something like multimodal imaging. So if you have brain images, or if you have any medical images, you have EHR data, you have blood work, you have omics, proteomics, genomics, those types of things. And those would be interesting use cases in the future with quantum, as hardware emerges and models improve, is say, okay, now where does it make sense? Where can we run this 32 qubit, circuit, or 100 qubit circuit that's good enough, to be used for patient use, basically. So any other comments as far as, I guess we'll focus on the quantum end, because a lot of people are coming from medical and, they just don't know about quantum. Now, I make an analogy, basically in the next 1 or 2 years, it's going to be like this. It's going to be fragmented. Like you're going off 1 or 2 literature papers. That's the best thing you got. It's not like a, fully developed yet. To the point where, AI and deep learning, like classical deep learning, is now. So it's just going to be that way. And like I said, Amazon will help you out. They have good simulators, but it's not like, it's not like you go on a page and we have a facial recognition, package, and we don't even care about the specs, but it works really well, kind of thing. It's still kind of technical because everybody's waiting for better simulators and better hardware. So anybody that we haven't heard from? And then, so so Ron was talking about this experience. So IBM has summer schools and they have many resources to get started. And it would be awesome to see other people in their own applications, and even medical is so broad on its own too. And just get started, start learning quantum gates. So these are matrix operations. So actually TensorFlow Quantum, which is owned by Google, has a certain simulator, and it combines the matrices before all the quantum, typically is processed, to get the, pre-processing of numbers, so it doesn't have to go through, it goes through faster, basically. And it beats their own simulator called CIRQ, or CIRQ. So, but that's, yeah, if you open up a program, more than likely it's going to have Hadamard gates, embedding layer, variational layer, which is typically the biggest one that pops out there, and then a measurement layer. Okay, so going from left to right, you're going classical to quantum. That's the embedding. And then variational does certain things like entanglement. So this is where you hear like exponential processing power. At lower qubits, I don't think you're going to see that as much, or at least I don't really. And then after that, measurement. So measurement gets it back into bits. So a 0 or a 1 for classical to go into that. So in all these, if you hear these words, parameterized quantum circuit, variational quantum circuit, there's VQC, so variational quantum, there's 3 or 4 different terms, and all of these are relating to the same thing. They're small quantum circuits that take classical data at some point, do something with it in a quantum mechanical way, and then output it in a 0 and a 1 or a 1, and that 0 or 1 can be read by classical again. So this is hybrid classical quantum, depending on the model, hybrid quantum classical, or you can have quantum. There's 4 different things: CQ, QC, or CQ, CQ, QC, QQ. There's 4 of those different options, and we're talking about data and algorithms. So the best is to have pure quantum data, but that's hard to get these days, because I think the only way to get that is through quantum sensors, and that's taking a lot of memory, or it's taking memory, but we don't have that amount of storage to store it into QRAM, quantum RAM. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, I had 2 points. The first one was about I was going to mention that the current quantum challenge by IBM is focused on dynamic programming, because I think IBM sort of found itself a bit flat-footed in that area. And I remember having conversations with, I don't know, maybe people in this group and people in the Chicago and the Washington, D.C. group, who were saying that IBM didn't support classical logic control of quantum circuits. I said, well, it makes no sense why it can't, because their quantum qubits live on these super chilled wafers, but there's a whole mass of external embedded electronics, like task specific or chunks of electronics that do all of the control of the qubits. The IBM qubits are controlled with microwaves or lasers, I forget which, and but it's external custom circuitry that's controlling those emitters and stuff. And it's like, so I was like, well, why can't it do this stuff? I mean, the thing is surrounded by a whole bunch of classical embedded electronics. Well, because they just didn't think about it, apparently.
Yeah. I think there's purists out there that you want everything quantum, right? Like,
Yeah.
but some things make sense. Obviously, do the quantum mechanics on the QPU, the real hardware, and then
Well,
do these.
this is not even related to that. This is just being able to change the direction of a quantum circuit on the fly. So for example, so what they call, so now they're scrambling to get all of their host sites. It has nothing to do with their qubits. It's the hosting environment, getting them upgraded so they understand dynamic coding. And basically what this comes down to is you do a quantum operation and you store it to a classical bit. You don't even have to, it's not even an issue whether you send those classical bits out to get processed somewhere. It's just, now I have the classical bit. Now what I want to do is use that classical bit to control the next step in my quantum timeline, which is, if the bit's set, I'm going to do nothing, or if the bit's set, I'm going to do a X gate, or if the bit's not set, I'm going to do a Z gate, and if it is set, I'm going to do a Y gate, stuff like that. So why wouldn't you have thought of that? What I'm getting the feeling of is like they just didn't think about it. It's just, having been embedded in this technology business for so long, is like I would think it would be second nature. But so they're doing their best to catch up to what some of the other vendors are doing in the dynamic thing. And they were actually today's second lab was to do an actual working teleportation program. IBM couldn't do that before because they didn't have dynamic programming capabilities.
Yeah.
And so it's that's a bit exciting, and it'll help them out with battling their issues that they have with their hardware.
Yeah, it was interesting because this Terra Quantum AG paper, they chose 3, or they chose 4, but 3 were gate-based superconducting qubits. So this is INQ, or I'm sorry, this is IBM, OQC, and Rigetti. And then they compared the 4 with IonQ, and the IonQ did better, than the others. But it was like an 11 qubit. I think it was their Lucy that they compared it to. And the other, they used the Rigetti 40, which has had the advantage. It can go, it makes sense to run on that on a time scale, even though it error wise, it was, I don't know how high it was versus a 30 qubit simulator. But yeah, I mean, gate-based superconducting qubits has kind of been like the theoretically the most powerful, but it's just IBM switched to hexagonal grid to account for some of the error. And then, you see these other measurements, and Google basically has remained kind of silent besides some QML updates to improve the pre-existing. They haven't released, as far as I know, a new quantum computer since October 2019. And that was quantum supremacy, or the first quantum supremacy, I think, of like 3. So, it's interesting because it's just like how much longer. I mean, if you look, so I saw a QC, was it not QC, where classic video, they're Israel based, and basically they did gate-based superconducting qubit to design a circuit, and the ion trap one was significantly, it only took like 6 layers, so deep, as opposed to say over like 20 it was for the gate-based superconducting, because your connectivity is much greater with the ion trap technology. So I don't know. It
So
just seems like the advantages are stacking up a little bit.
I'm only familiar with IBM's interconnect topology, which is, like you said, they call it a double hexagonal network. I'm not familiar with these other superconducting entities. Do you know what sort of interconnect
Well, are you talking? So ion trap, I don't believe is considered superconducting, even though it uses liquid helium at one point. Are you talking the other manufacturers for gate-based?
Yeah, you had mentioned there's other superconducting vendors. I don't know that much about their.
Well, I know Rigetti switched to multi-chip, so that's their 40Q and 80Q. So that was kind of state of the art, maybe when they did this paper, this Terra Quantum paper last November 2022. And then, OQC, I just don't know too much about. I know they're on Briquette, AWS Briquette, and I think their qubit count is just a little bit lower than the others. They're UK based, but there hasn't been one that kind of popped out to me like this is the gate-based superconducting manufacturer that's far above the others. I think they're all kind of like in that same ballpark as far as, working stuff out and getting things better. And as you mentioned, the dynamic circuits has been helping a lot. And, I've had explanations to me is they basically say like it's a classical computer is helping out where quantum is not good at, right? And that was just my interpretation, is basically like, people want it to be as quantum as it can, but hey, to maybe do this gate or to do this operation, it might make sense to do it more classical based. So, but IonQ for sure. And then Quantinuum, we touched on this a little bit last week. Quantinuum announced, so it's was this 32 qubit. So for those that haven't done much programming, and Ron's definitely got a head start with it. So to get entanglement on 2 qubits, it's called a Bell state. Okay, so there's multiple types of Bell states, but it's just 2 qubits, so 2 wires basically. Now to move up, you have to do either a W state or a GHZ state, and that's multi-qubit entanglement. So Quantinuum was able to do this, like I said, over like 32 gates, and relatively high fidelity, it looked like. So all steps in the right direction, but still, when I look at this paper and it says the threshold is basically 30, and once you pass that threshold into using real quantum computers, you're still dealing with a lot of error. So to justify that, for the real quantum computers, I've heard just go higher, higher in qubits, or even though there's error. So it's not a fully worked out thing yet. And we referenced, so this is going back a little bit, but we referenced the Tom's Hardware GPU paper, and it's based on article. It's based on another paper that's saying like, in the near term, at least, the future is going to be with these GPU simulators over a real quantum computer. So there's drawbacks, right? Like we know the GPUs are not energy efficient. I believe they're still considered error free, which is like 10 to the 20th operations. There's an error, like it's really low. So,
Yeah,
it's just
we
that,
we still don't have any good data on what the energy profile of quantum hardware is. None of these vendors are talking about it. You could probably guess at how much energy it takes to keep a quantum an IBM quantum array of qubits, near absolute zero. I mean, that's some intense refrigeration going on. Who knows what the power for that is?
oh yeah, what it took to make that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much energy did they have to, how much electricity did they have to burn to get it that cold? The same thing with trapped ions. I never got a straight answer out of anybody. It seems like trapped ions might be a little better, but I'm not exactly convinced there isn't some even though it's not superconducting, I believe they have to chill their ions down to a pretty low temperature still.
Yeah, it's a specific part of it. It's just not as much as gate-based superconducting
Yeah.
qubit.
It's not
So
millikelvins, it's like in the tens or 20 of kelvins. So,
yeah,
but they have to get those ions to settle down, and so they're near enough to a ground state that they can use their lasers and stuff to do what they call sympathetic cooling, which is to which is basically like noise canceling. If you have a noise canceling headset, they use this similar technique where they have to, if you know what the base frequency of the ion is, or the natural frequency of the ion is, and you fire a laser that's some multiple of that frequency, and it's precisely in 180 degrees out of phase, it'll have the effect of dampening the energy of that ion so that it drops into the ground state. But I'm thinking those guys still have to get their stuff pretty cold. Maybe not millikelvins, but all they do talk about, you got to get those ions into the ground state before you start anything. So we have no idea what sort of infrastructure surrounds each one of these sites. Each one of these quantum cores. So
yeah. I
I don't know
mean,
if it's
as
fair
far
to,
as it
to
being,
compare energy levels at this point.
yeah, I think the cost is going to come in is if you can use nitrogen, liquid nitrogen, because there's like 80% in the air. Liquid helium, I think actually the ones that use gate-based superconducting qubits, they have an agreement with national thing to keep the helium coming in. So that's not an issue. But yeah, I mean, it's just so much, as far as I know, there's so much more nitrogen and we're breathing it right now. And then you just liquefy and then, but I don't even know if the ion trap can use that. I was always told that it's always just, it's for a specific spot and you use a lot less of it. I'm not sure the exact temperature though. So we have another guest here. So we've basically been talking about hybrid quantum machine learning, and then kind of like that impact a lot of this is going to have in medical, right? So is a QPU simulator the same thing as running on a GPU, right? So those types of things. And once it's all in there, the application of it all, right? That's the harder part. Like these are the specifics. And to me, it seems like the quantum circuits algorithm is not as hard as the rest of the stuff, and figuring it out and saying, okay, this would make sense, even though that part's going to confuse people. So any other comments as far as like on the medical side, moving forward with this, even the historical approach with AI, and we've kind of touched on the late 1990s and early 2000s and 2017 FDA deep learning approval for that specific type. So, but yeah, I mean, to get to that point and to have a quantum advantage, it's not going to be too much likely, in the near term, but it's still proof of concept, and you understood what gates to change, and you understood what quantum hyperparameters to change, and if I change this, then it'll make the circuit run longer or run shorter, those types. And I would encourage people to do that, either IBM Qiskit, there's a number of penny lane models. I'm basically on my second one with quantum transfer learning with that too. But on the other side, like on a macro scale, is that NSF, or National Science Foundation, says we're supposed to have a practical quantum computer this year. That's just in their PDF. And then so IonQ says they're making a manufacturing facility for ion trap technology first half of next year. And it has basically Biden's support. It had Obama's support. Trump was, basically formed this initiative to launch, or the funding eventually went to QEDC, and then QEDC is bringing these big companies together for a consortium, and it's an ongoing thing. So they have a thing in Denver coming up. So yeah, it's an active thing. And I think for many people that don't understand quantum, they've kind of bought into it more so than maybe even 6 months or a year ago, just because the rest of the world is. And this goes for China, UK, Australia, we talked about, I think last week too. So like billions of dollars, Google, $1 billion, for Australia. And then our country, like for the government and funding for QIS, quantum information science, last year was like $800 million every single year, even though it's kind of like leveling out, because it's seeming like it's going more into industry. But yeah, if you watch one of my early discussions, quantum is a government initiative. And I said that kind of from the beginning, early 1980s, first to fund NSF is more on the mathematical side, and they're the ones that are projecting, a practical quantum computer this year. And then let's see. And if you're looking to get into coding, for sure, because Ron talked about Qiskit, I talked about penny lane, because a lot of the models I'm dealing with, there's a lot of papers out there. So penny lane is basic quantum machine learning, although the machine learning on your data set isn't quite there yet. Now, they're in many academic papers. So you just Control F and you find penny lane. Their gates are like .h for Hadamard. Actually, it's .Hadamard, I think, for that one. But C0 is CNOT caps. But you can kind of pick based on the code, right? So they're all going to act in similar ways, but like a penny lane is going to have a different dot. And then say penny lane has at QML.node, so in Qiskit, it's more like neural network, or they have neural network. They have two other ones too that are related to quantum machine learning. And they have their specific commands to it and using it. And the only way to figure it out is try it. If you're looking to get into using QML for whatever your application is, if it's not healthcare, that just get on Qiskit, it's free. And they make it very hard for you to spend money, because they never asked for my credit card, and I only ran on smaller quantum computers on that one. Go ahead, Ron.
So aside from imaging, has anybody heard of any other inroads for quantum into the medical world, as far as I don't know, other sorts of diagnostics? I know it seems like most everything in medicine is based on some sort of machine learning enhancement via quantum.
Yeah.
But has anybody heard, I know there are things going on with sensors and stuff like that, but sensors are one thing. Or has anybody heard of any new breakthroughs in getting sensors to connect directly with quantum computing?
Yeah. So for your first question, drug discovery. So they're either going to be using PQCs, as far as I know. I know they use quantum annealing. So that's like 5,000 qubits, but for optimization kind of stuff. And then the whole goal with all of this. So right now, the near-term solution is using pre-existing images. They're classical, right? But you can embed them, going classical to quantum into a variational quantum circuit. And then that transition is not as efficient for performance as opposed to having pure quantum data. So like I said, like the last I heard, the only way to get pure quantum data, which is ridiculous, which is really hard to store, like in QRAM, we don't have very good QRAM, is to take a quantum sensor and get quantum data. So that could be, as far as I know, like an image, or, you know, you have quantum sensors, right, for squids or MEGs or OPMs, that type of thing. But you take that quantum data and then you don't need an embedding layer, and you go straight into a variational circuit. And then I think you would still have to measure to go back to classical, because I don't think quantum can quite finish it off. But yeah, that's the goal, is quantum data, which is like a QQ or a QC. So that's your quantum data, and then a classical algorithm, or quantum data and quantum algorithm. Those are the things where you're going to get the best advantage.
Yeah, yeah, I guess I was aware of, you know, using quantum for drug discovery, but when you look at it again, that's just a lot of that is just quantum enhanced optimization or quantum enhanced machine learning. Like one of the groups that we heard from, they were using quantum to just pre-select molecule profiles, and then, because you know there's millions and billions of molecules out there, they use quantum to try to guess at the efficacy for a given task of a certain molecule, and then if it got tagged, then they would hand that off to a traditional classical machine learning thing to grind through. In that way, that's one thing quantum, especially in optimization, is really good at. It's got this ability to zero in on answers quickly, or get close to answers on much quicker than classical, with using certain algorithms. But the bizarre part about it is it sort of has this side effect where it moves everything out of the middle. So it's either giving you a really good example or a really bad example. And then but what they're doing is, because they don't have to feed the entire data set of every known molecule to their machine learning, they're only giving to the ones, they're only handing off the ones that the Q model picked as good guesses. They're saving a lot of time and money, and they're getting good results apparently, and you know, in finding molecules that should do a certain thing.
Yeah.
And then the other area, well, just generic chemistry, I'm sure you're aware, is using quantum to simulate molecular behavior, just generic molecular at the quantum level. And boy, that's really chewing up quantum resources fast too. So
yeah, it's interesting. Well, first off, so Emmanuel, if you have anything, you can go ahead. Anything quantum or medical, that's fine. And I mean, it just reminds me what I've been talking about, because it's like a ResNet, or it's a convolutional neural network. Basically, it's deep learning classical. I'm switching those out in my next iteration, you know, one for another, and the quantum's going to remain. And then what's the impact with that, and just fully understanding it all. But the same thing with yours, it's like, you know, this specific part we're doing for pre-selection. The thing, when people think drug discovery, they think like molecule, you know, like atom for qubit, you know, that whole kind of thing, like one for one, let's do this like fundamentally. But it's like 162 qubits just for caffeine, right? We've been talking about 30 qubit simulators. So yeah. But yeah, anybody else, any other comments or questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have seen the material you sent, a lot of about images related to the lesions, like a tumor, right? What about the volumetry? Do you have some results about the performance? Like, for example, a volumetry of the temporal lobe, volumetry of the frontal lobe, and the specific areas of the brain?
For quantum?
Yes, like for example, NeuroQuant, Free Surfer, this type of tool to measure the specific regions of the brain.
Well, I mean, that sounds more like a sensing thing, like quantum sensing. And, but if it's like a existing image kind of thing using quantum, um, I'm not there yet because I'm still going through data sets on my own. And then, say for instance, my glioma will be like, there'd be certain types of angles that of the picture that look like that. But yeah, on that kind of microscopic, it sounds microscopic scale. I don't think it's there yet. The top one we have in our industry, they did multi-class classification, and it's a Google Kaggle data set. So it's a more of a crude thing, right? Like it typically doesn't show the brain images all like, okay, this head looks